Hey guys, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is Wednesday, October 8th. I hope you're having a great day. And I thought about going over the news items, but I decided to zero into one topic. It's a case before the Supreme Court dealing with what they call so-called conversion therapy. That's where you try to convert someone who's gay into being straight. And Colorado has outlawed that. As a therapist, you can't discourage that. You can't encourage someone to change their sexual identity. Otherwise, you can lose your license. And it's been taken to court, and they said this is a free speech violation. But I want to step back a little bit, and we'll dig in a little bit about this law and what I think the court will do. But the biggest problem we have, and a lot of people go to college now. Everyone goes to college. Everyone's student loans, but everyone's kind of stupid. I don't think they teach a lot in college anymore. But they used to teach some critical thinking and understanding language and terms, and we've confused those. And this isn't political. This is just how you understand the world. And they confuse two different concepts, or one is something we call an essential identity, and another is a descriptive attribute or behavioral label. They're two different things. And what I mean by that is, for example, you could say Paul is a human being. That is what we would call technically an essential identity, meaning it's inherent to me. It's a fundamental characteristic of someone at their core that is intrinsic. You can't change it. Or Paul has blue eyes. That's just part of who I am. Or Paul is white. That's part. It's an intrinsic part of my identity. Or a dog has four legs. Again, that's an essential identity. But then we have another descriptor we use in language. For example, say Paul is a thief. And that is what we call a behavioral label. It's not an essential identity. It's a label based on their behavior. So no one like is born a thief, or that's not essential based on what they are. That's a role that they're performing, or that's a term we use based on what they do. So let's say if you dress up like a hippie, then you can say, "Oh, Paul's a hippie," and that's not intrinsic. I didn't come out a hippie, but I have certain things I've done in my life. Let's say at a time I had long hair and love beads in the '60s. Then you could say I'm a hippie, right? But it's a behavioral label, and behavioral labels aren't bad. We use them all the time. Helps us live as human beings. We put a label on something, and yeah, labels are good. Sometimes it's important to have a label so we have a common understanding of what it is. But the problem is when we confuse essential identities with a descriptive attribute or behavioral label. And that's what has happened recently in many cases. But the most common one when it comes to homosexual or LGBTQ, that has been treated as an essential identity when throughout history it's been considered a descriptive attribute or behavioral label. So an example, if you steal, you are called a thief. And in the same way, if you commit certain acts, you are called a homosexual, but that's not your essential identity. And that's a big thing that has changed. And that's why there was such a push to say you were born that way, which is strange because we found no gene for that to explain that or anything like that. And the rates of homosexuality and all the variants of really change based on social conditioning. I think like Gen Z now is like 20% consider themselves some version of LGBTQ, and it used to be like 2%. So obviously it's not genetic, it's a social thing. It's a descriptive attribute or a behavioral label. It is not an essential identity. But we chose as a society to treat it as an essential identity. And this had big impact because, for example, if someone's black If they were born black, there's nothing they can do about it. It's not their fault. It's what they are. It's essential to them. And so we treat people like that different. It's like, we can't judge you for being black. We can judge you based on what you do. So if you do crimes and you do various things, we're judging you for the crimes, not for your race. And the same with sex until recently. And this is what's really confused it, because they've kind of gone away from you're born that way because of the whole trans thing. Because as a trans, obviously you're born, let's say, male, and then you get older and you think now you're a girl. Well, obviously you weren't born that way. So they have the idea you're born in the wrong body. Again, this is all nonsense. There's no science behind this. It was all political. And you can debate whether what should be the idea about homosexuality. Should it be promoted? Should it be discouraged? Should it be neutral? And that's a valid discussion. Throughout most civilization, it depends. It depends on the civilization. But in Western civilization, it always existed to a degree. And again, it was looked at as a behavior, not as an identity. And it was mostly illegal. Later on, it became a mental health issue, and you try to convert people away from that, sort of like a drug abuser. So let's say if you're a drug addict, you weren't born a drug addict. We could call someone, oh, this guy's a drug addict. Again, that's a descriptive label. It's not his essential identity. But we've mixed that up. So now we say, no, 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 no. These people that are homosexual or bisexual or all the variations, I don't know, there's so many now, trans. And I assume then you have to ask, well, how about people that think they're a different species, that they're really a cat or a dog? Or how about people that like to have sex with children? I think they call them minor attractive. I mean, they're pedophiles, but they have a nice term for them. Or people that want to have sex with animals or all that type of stuff. Are they born that way too? And so this is where we're going down. But so it was always considered a behavior. And so it was up to morality. Now, again, I'm not really going to debate the morality in this video, but traditionally religions condemn it because it's bad for society, because it undermines civilization of a mother and a father. And we're starting to see that. But it was a debate. It was a moral thing. Yeah, people did this sort of thing, but we deemed as a society that's immoral, and we don't tolerate that. And how we don't tolerate it, it could be everywhere from years ago in the Old Testament, a death penalty for engaging in that behavior, to prison, to a fine or whatever, or treated as a mental illness. Or now, then we went through kind of, oh, just be neutral about it. But now we're actually affirming it. And we don't allow anyone really to, it's illegal in Colorado to a therapist to help someone, let's say, that says, hey, I think I was born in the wrong body. The therapist in Colorado, even if you're a Christian therapist, you can't say, well, no, you're not born in the wrong body, probably. You have your body, you have gender issues here. Let's discuss it and see what's happening. Because a lot of people, especially when they go through junior high, they have a lot of issues. And instead of someone working through that, it's illegal to discuss that in Colorado and many other states. And again, it all comes back to we as a society and so-called medical experts have declared that as an essential identity. I think that was done for political reasons. There's no scientific reason. There's no gay gene or bisexual gene or trans gene. There's nothing genetic about that. You could argue some people have a predisposition to a certain behavior, and I would say that's true, but that's true with other behaviors too. We see that with alcoholism. That's why I don't even like the term an alcoholic. I consider that a descriptive label. It's not an essential identity. Someone, they drink too much and they can't control themselves. We put the term alcoholic, but I don't think you're born an alcoholic. However, there does seem to be a correlation. A lot of people are more susceptible to it. I think a lot of the Indian population is, for example. So there could be a genetic component to that you are susceptible to certain behaviors. And that makes sense. violence for one. Like if your parents were violent, you are probably going to be more susceptible to violence. And you could go down the list, or drugs or alcohol. And I would put sexual immorality is in the same category. I do think some people are more susceptible to various behaviors. But again, the behavior, even though you may be more susceptible to it, it's not part of your innate identity. But we called it an innate identity. The so-called experts, which they're political. They're not experts. They're not scientists in like a physicist type of thing way, or a chemist or a mathematician. They call themselves scientists, but they're not really. They're like priests. They have a political and an ideological point of view that they couch as science, but it's not really science. And this is a whole different issue of how we perverted science. From science used to be hard evidence. You didn't have, you try to get rid of your bias. Here's the evidence, and therefore it looks like this is true. Force equals mass times acceleration. It's a physics thing, and you can demonstrate that. And it seems to always pretty much be true without getting into quantum mechanics, but most of the world is true. So that's what you call science. And then you have more of the soft sciences, let's say like archaeology, which, you look at the evidence and you come up with a story, but you don't have the total evidence. So your story may be off, but there's still some science in there. But then you get the so-called science of psychology and therapy, which I put in very close to like astrology or religion. I don't see a therapist much different than a priest. And I'm not trying to put down priest or therapist. It's just not a scientific category. But we treat it as a scientific category, even though there's no evidence behind it. There isn't any evidence. It's not like, oh, yeah, we have the gay gene here, and you take this pill, you can cure gay. It's not like that. There's no science behind that. It's just that these people, which not that long ago, just when I was born, these so-called experts considered homosexuality a deviance, a mental illness. And now these same experts are like, oh, no, you're born this way. We got to affirm it. In fact, it's dangerous to tell kids not to engage in homosexual acts, or now trans, or God knows what else. I don't know how they're going to expand it. But that's a fundamental problem that we're happening. So what's happening now is there's a lawsuit going up in this at the Supreme Court, and they heard an argument yesterday on October 7th. And a lot of the judges, including Alito and even Kagan, who she's a liberal, they're kind of skeptical of the ban because of speech regulations. It could violate the First Amendment. And the people that are for this ban against conversion therapy, they're saying, no, we have, like in the medical field, you have a right to set standards, and doctors have to follow the standards. So, for example, let's say if you, I don't know, you have diabetes, and there's a certain way to treat diabetes. And let's say one doctor says, well, I want to treat it by using leeches. And so the standards could be, no, you can't use leeches to treat diabetes, because that's not scientific. We know that's harmful. So that's an example. That's what they're using. So they're saying, we know that using conversion therapy is harmful to LGBTQ kids. And see, right off the bat, I reject their language. I don't think there are LGBTQ kids, not one. As an essential identity, there's children, sadly, that commit homosexual acts, but that's not an essential identity. But how they phrase it, again, as this essential identity instead of a behavioral attribute. And so that really confuses the things. So they use the term LGBTQ as you would say, let's say black. You're a black person, or you're Asian, or whatever, but it's not. It's a behavior. But they assume it's an identity, and then they assume that counseling people out of that behavior is harmful. So it'd be like if you have it'd be an example, let's say if you're a drug addict and you're a kid and you go in for therapy, and the law says, no, 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 we got to protect our drug addict children, and that's their identity. We need to affirm it and celebrate it. And it's harmful to say anything else than to affirm their drug addiction, because we think this is good, is to be celebrated. They were born this way. No one chooses to be a drug addict. They were born that way. We need to accept it. And we can tell how it's horrible, because a lot of drug addicts, they commit suicide and they're depressed. And obviously, that's because you don't accept their drug addiction. They can't help how they are. It's the same logic, and that's what they're using. So, really, how the Supreme Court is looking at this is, I disagree with. I don't really think this is a free speech issue, although I think the court's going to rule that it violates the First Amendment. I think it's just a morality issue, that if I was like, I had the Ramsey Paul empire, I would have laws that would make it illegal for therapists to affirm this type of behavior. I would say, no, you can't do that. That's harmful for kids to affirm that type of behavior. So it's just the opposite. So I don't really have a problem with medical regulations. I'm just saying they're using this medical regulations on something that's a behavior, not an essential identity, for political reasons. Because again, most of these psychotherapists, almost 100%, are left wing. This is what they support. To them, a lot of them, they like to see the increase of homosexuality and all the variants among children. They target that, and they don't want anything to roll that back. So this is the fundamental issue with conversion therapy and the fundamental debate. For me, I don't really see it so much as free speech. That's not what I'm concerned with. My concern is we're mixing what's an identity versus what's a behavior, and then saying, oh no, that they can't help that's just how they are. That's very, very harmful. All right, guys, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.